I told you the car repo crisis would absolutely be devastating and would hit us much harder than we ever anticipated. Well, think back in 2020. What was going on? Shortages. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry was able to get a car. And some of these clowns that were going out there and buying these cars, paying over $100,000 above sticker. I even went to a Toyota dealer and they told me you're going to pay another $15,000 on top of a sticker just to pay for some paint protection film, which they had done in-house. And yet people were doing this. People were willing to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 over. Even Corvettes, we know those were hot ticket items for a period of time. But people were willing to spend willy-nilly. Now, unfortunately, the roosters come home to roost. See, because now the banks are struggling. Banks want to collect, they want their money, but they're not getting it. Subprime borrowers are literally at the leading edge of this catastrophe that we're about to face. That's right, we're seeing numbers that we haven't seen ever. As a matter of fact, statistics are showing that the last time we saw numbers as bad as repossessions that are 60 days and beyond not making payments was back in the 90s, mid-90s thereabouts. People were struggling as well. But here, of course, things got better. The economy got better. Things changed. People started getting in their usual buying habits. But now things are getting back and they're getting downright ugly. Why is this? And who's it affecting? How can you personally avoid it? I'm going to share some of those answers for you. But ultimately, when I look at this, I can't help but say, look, I constantly tell them, advise them, keep your payments down. Actually, if even better, cash is king. Try to find ways to minimize your attachment to the banks. Why? Well, because the banks need to get paid. And if you're stuck and you're rooted in heavy car payments or big mortgage payments, when crap hits the fan, like we're seeing right now of cost of living crisis, a wrapper of bacon now costs $17 here in Canada, whereas the minimum wage is only $15. How does that make any sense? People are paying a lot more for food than they did 5 or 6, 7 years ago. People are also paying a lot for houses. Interest rates, although we've seen a couple drops recently, they're not doing that well either. But the people hardest hit are the subprime buyers. That's right. Subprime borrowers are the ones absolutely getting decimated. Well, the prime buyers, those typically with a well-heeled bankroll, those that typically maybe borrow a little bit less, those that when they borrow, they have higher credit scores because they've got a good, solid, outstanding history, means the banks have a lot more confidence. They're also looking that those are having a much lower number of defaults. As a matter of fact, they're much more closer to a 0.3, 0.4%. And what does that mean? That means that's a very small percentage of the population that are defaulting. The rate is sitting around 0.37% for prime borrowers. But it's much higher at 6.65% of car loans today of subprime buyers are going default. That's right, over 60 days, and now the banks want to get their money. The worst part is we haven't seen numbers like this in forever. Where it really all started to happen was in 2020-21. 2020, the banks were happy signing over loan to value ratios of closer to 140, 150%. They didn't care. They knew that people were going to pay, governments were giving money, and it just seemed like an opportunity. With all the printing of cash, people were paying. They were making their payments. So people were paying over sticker. And I still can't believe why they would ever do that, but they were doing it. Even under the advice that some of the experts like myself, have been telling each and every one of you, never, ever, ever pay over sticker. Certainly, the more amount money you have down as well, the better off you'll be, and the shorter the loan term, even better yet. See, because if you take a loan term out for, say, 2 or 3 years, even if you have to borrow some cash, if crap hits the fan and the economy goes upside down, maybe you lose your job, well, you're not into it for such a long pickle. However, if you stretch your car payments out to 84 months and beyond, like a lot of people were doing, what do you think's going to happen? Well, number one, first of all, negative equity. See, that's a big factor here. A lot of people didn't have the money. So the worse income levels, typically the subprime buyers are ones that are generally borrowing more money. They have poor credit scores and they were drawing those loan terms out much longer. You're at a huge risk. First of all, you're negative equity, so you're underwater almost immediately because you're making pitsly payments. What? Yeah, small amounts of payments which really don't go to principal. They largely go to the interest. So for the first few years, 3 to 4 years, you're paying almost all interest charges. Did you know that? So a lot of people now that are taking 84-month loan terms, they go to trade their car in thinking, hey, at 3 years, I can't afford to drive this car anymore. Warranty's expiring. I'm going to go trade it in. And they're realizing that that $52,000 vehicle, when they go trade it in, is only worth about $25,000. They've all lost all kinds of money, and yet they've been putting in. They've put in almost the full amount. They've spent all of that money on pretty much interest charges, and all of that money went up in smoke. They really put very little down to principal. So where the vehicle's only worth $25,000, they still owe the bank like $48,000 on that $50,000 vehicle. This is just what's been going on. And unfortunately, we're seeing the pressures right now in mounting with the cost of living crisis, and a lot of the subprime buyers are struggling. They want to get out of some of these long loan terms. And remember, as I said, the rooster's coming home to roost, because we said 2021 is when there was the shortages, but governments were handing out money. So what happened? Well, the banks were okay in signing over these risky ventures, but people obviously had the money from the government. There was extra expendable cash, and the banks were getting paid for a while. And so it didn't seem like that big of a risk, but it was, and clearly. So now that we're about 4, 5, 6 years later, we're starting to see the residual, the fallout. Same thing with lease payments. All of these factors are starting to play, and they're starting to roll in. Unfortunately, what we're starting to see now are cases where companies like PrimaLand, of course, they do sort of the buy here, pay here sort of environment. Well, guess what? They just filed for bankruptcy last month. Yeah, they're struggling. Another one, Tricolor. Yeah, we've heard of them as well. Pretty much filed for bankruptcy, and that happened in September. Why is that happening? Because these are lenders that are generally dealing with lower income level buyers, or people that are generally a much higher risk. So now you're having these cases where these companies who were lending to these riskier buyers are also defaulting. They're not getting paid. Therefore, the bank's not getting paid because the bank's going calling. They don't want to ruin their portfolio, but at the same token, they're defaulting. Banks are losing millions of dollars every single week, every single month, largely because people are saying, look, a decision has to be made. You know, the kid's sick, they need the medication, car payment's going to have to wait. We're going to have to skip that this month. Food, obviously a lot of crisis around that. We know food prices are going up. Why do you think walk-in traffic at McDonald's, Wendy's, all of those fast food joints are going down? Sales are being reported as falling through the floor. Those are all key indicators of what's actually going on in the industry and what's going on actually in the entire economy. But see, when we start to see those other trigger points, people aren't shopping. Typically, the lower income levels are gravitating more to the fast food, cigarettes, booze, and all of those sales seem to be dropping right now. There's indicators that all of those areas are suffering in their business, their sales, and their profits. Well, none of us are crying, poor woe is me for McDonald's. I mean, let's be honest, but those are, in fact, indicators. When sales are tanking, that's a sign that, well, their food is not something I call quality. Certainly the prices are going up, and unfortunately, less and less people have the money to blow on a $15 Big Mac combo. So this is just further enhancement and reinforcement of what's going on. We haven't seen these types of rates. We're now at 6.65% of these subprime buyers toggling past that 60 months to the point where they're having to say bye-bye to their new car. Well, a lot of people are just willing to just give it away. Some people are even just saying, here, take it, please. But ultimately, it's a very sticky position. Banks are losing money. Lendings, these riskier lending operations are losing money. Some of them are going upside down. People are losing money. Bankruptcies are rising at an alarming rate, and largely because repos are absolutely coming in with an avalanche. We're seeing it left, right, and center. Big part of it was people saw that shiny new toy, new technology, new features, government handing out money, lots of easy buying. Of course, a lot of these manufacturers were willing to give incentives. And even people thinking that incentives was a great way to get into a new car. That was yet another sucker punch. People that didn't read between the lines, people that weren't as well dialed in to how the market actually works. And that where a price of a vehicle may offer 1.9%, 0.9%, But a lot of people say, hey, that's a great deal. But guess what? You're not thinking. Why? Because unfortunately, where they take it, they give it with 0% or 1%, they're fluffing it up on the cash price of that vehicle. They're getting paid no matter what. See, if there's one thing that's for sure, car manufacturers have been doing this for a long time. They know how to get paid. They know how to pull a fast one on you. And ultimately, it's up to you to read between the lines. But let's be honest. You should never, ever get yourself in over your head. And I don't want to make this a preaching exposure or experience. I mean, we all sometimes like to buy and have those frivolous expenditures. Sometimes I see the latest iPhone and I'm like, I think I want that. But it's more of a want rather than a need. And people are buying like it's going out of style. Big incentives, new technology, great flashy new cars, and people get sucked in. Then, of course, incentives are teetering people who are otherwise sort of on the fence. And now you have a whole new swarm of people. But it's usually people who aren't paying attention. Those that are paying attention generally buy with a little more caution. That's why the 0.37% of prime and above buyers are defaulting to 60 days and beyond. That's almost nothing. But we're up to almost 7%. That's close to, what is that? 1 in 10 or 1 in 13 buyers are pretty much given up. I don't know, whatever it is. I mean, that's not even relevant. But pretty much almost 7% of the buyers that have lower credit scores, poor income levels, are unfortunately defaulting. Repos climbing at an alarming rate. So again, we can't help but emphasize, if you can't afford it, you shouldn't buy it. And I hate to say that because I've been caught up in those scenes too. I love buying that next flashy car, that next new toy. But then I have to give my head a shake and say, you know what? No, I think we need to do a little bit better than that. I'm going to save some money. I'm going to use the term delayed gratification. And that's a term you're going to have to get used to hearing when you're on my channel. I've been in the business a long time. I've bought and sold, 150 cars or more of my own personal vehicles. I've been in car sales, car repairs, you name it. I've been doing this a long time. And I've seen a lot of good habits and bad habits. But the people that generally come out well, the people that typically do well for themselves, look for the best deals. The times strike when the manufacturers are desperate, when they're moving out into a new model, catch the last of the outgoing model that's heavily discounted on both interest rates as well as cash price. But above all, never ever take out these long loan terms. These 84-month, 90 some odd beyond month loan terms are an absolute recipe for disaster. Going negative equity is a bad place to be because right off the hop, your vehicle's worth far less. So rather, you're all pretty much better off to sticking to a 3 or 4 years at the absolute most. I personally like to be more in that 2 to 3 year range to allow for that buffer time. See, if something happens with a job or some other scenario, I like to know that I'm not locked in for too terribly long. I also like to consider putting down at least 40 or 50% of the value. Many experts say, you know what, as long as you put down 20, 25%, that's a good place to be. I would say that's a bare minimum. I wouldn't really put down any less than 25%. So on a $40,000 car, if you're not putting down at least $10,000 up front, maybe more, then you shouldn't probably buy it. Keep fixing what you're driving. What's wrong with that vehicle? Maybe it needs a new set of tires. A $1,500 set of wheels is a lot cheaper than getting caught up in those payments because remember, your first car payment of your next new vehicle, which they say the average transaction price now is around 50 grand. And at 50 grand on a 4 or 5 year loan term, you're up in that $1,200 to $1,400 a month. So think about that's just one full set of tires. So instead of that, skip on all those car payments. Put a new set of tires on your old vehicle. That'll get you through until you're able to save up. Have that 20, 30, 40, 50% down payment. That way you're not snookered. You're also not going to be likely welcomed to negative equity because now all of a sudden a $40,000 car, you're putting say, 50% down, you're only putting 20, you're only borrowing 20 grand now. You've already got so much built, so much skin in the game that you're guaranteed the money you've got into it is coming right off the base, right off of the base core value, the cash value of that vehicle. You don't have to worry about what the bank is charging you anymore. The fact that they might be charging you 4.9 versus 1.9 really isn't as relevant. The amount that you're paying on interest charges is vastly less. And as well, on top of it, I always suggest having a little extra buffer. Focus on getting those payments paid down preventatively in advance. If you can, in fact, pay cash 100%. Now, some people like to reinvest their money in places and say, look, I've got 50 grand, but I'll take that 1.9% and then I can reinvest this 50 grand in a little business venture or an investment. Sure, if you can do that, if your yield on your investment or business opportunity exceeds what you're paying on interest, go for it. But quite often it doesn't. So ultimately, keep your payments down, shorten up your loan terms, don't get overzealous, and maybe just fix that old clunker. Anyway, I'd like to hear your thoughts about how you're going to manage. We're seeing this absolute avalanche of repos, and it's only going to get worse. But there's a flip side. The bright side is incentives, deals. You might even find some nice cars rolling through the auction sometime soon. We're going to see that. That time is coming. The banks want to get paid. Everybody wants to get paid. Anyway, drop a line. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how you would personally react. Are you looking for a car? Or in fact, are you sort of using the delayed gratification method and hanging on until you have enough money to put down? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Hope to see each and every one of you real soon, everybody. Bye-bye.